Radiant and Resilient is about mindset and faith to break paradigms and overcome challenges in our life. Because when the mind, body, and spirit are aligned, we literally radiate from the inside out. I'm Kay Vasquez. Let's dive in. I'm currently recording this episode about to be 40 weeks pregnant in a couple of days. And so what I want to do is share my insights and perspective around the due date, because this episode was inspired with a conversation I had with my midwife to discover that the due date my OB had given me was not accurate. So tune in and listen, because I'm going to share my thoughts and perspectives on why it was inaccurate. What happens in Western medicine is when you learn that you're pregnant, you go to the OB and they ask you, when is the first day of your last period? Based on that date, they determine your estimated due date. Now, notice how I said estimate, because the estimated due date is just that, because they base it off the first day of your last period. But not only that, it's based off a woman who has a regular 28-day cycle, given that she ovulates on day 14. So I thought this was interesting, especially as I go through pregnancy for the first time and experience things from a Western medicine standpoint, but also more of a holistic, natural, functional medicine standpoint as well. What I've learned is that because most women don't actually track their cycles and ovulation, the OB only has one specific data to go off of, which is the first day of the last menstrual period. After working with a lot of women in functional medicine and having women track their cycle for the first time, I've learned so much. The first thing that I've learned is that most women don't always have a regular 28-day cycle. I definitely didn't. My cycle lasted 26 to 28 days. And not only that, once I started tracking ovulation, which I use an Oura ring to do that, checking my basal body temperature every single day, I typically ovulate on day 15, not day 14. And other women that I've worked with, same thing, would ovulate day 14 or 16. I had one client who ovulated on day 21. So the day of ovulation can vary so much. So when a woman is pregnant and they go to the OB and they estimate the due date, it's based off of 40 weeks from the first day of their last period. I'm going to explain why this is important to be aware of, especially if you are planning to conceive in the future. Because first off, in Western medicine, there's such a push and such a pressure for women to conceive by 40 weeks of pregnancy. But if this estimated date of 40 weeks isn't always accurate, Western medicine can force the woman to go into labor before her body and the baby are actually ready. So with that understanding, I knew that I didn't want to be forced into labor earlier than I needed to. My perspective is that when women are forced to go into labor sooner than their body and the baby are ready, then there's going to be complications. Unfortunately, a lot of it is medically induced. There's going to be complications during delivery, complications with the baby. There's higher rates of induction, and not only induction, but tears and C-sections and so many other complications that can happen. Because what I truly believe is that God designed woman for a reason, not only to carry a life, but to be able to deliver. And yes, there are things that can happen during labor and delivery that are outside of our control, and I'm so grateful that Western medicine is here for that. However, there's been such a huge shift. C-sections used to be rare. Now it's commonly scheduled. And yes, there's a lot of factors we have to take into account. There are women that are high risk. And obviously, if you are high risk and it's better off to get induced, to get a C-section to protect you and the baby, by all means, I am all for that. However, if women are low risk, but they're being forced to go into labor and delivery earlier than the body and the baby's ready for it, I believe that also increases the complications as well. As you listen to this episode, again, I'm sharing my insights, what I've learned, my perspectives, but also know that there's so many factors to consider, and it's so important to work with practitioners, not just in Western medicine, but also who have more of a holistic, natural approach to childbirth. Do your research, gather your own perspective, your own belief, and most importantly, listen to your intuition to determine what's best for you. So what led me to share my perspectives and insights on the due date is because I was tracking my cycle and ovulation for 4 years before I got pregnant. And that's why I knew how long my cycle was the day I ovulated based off my basal body temperature. And there's other markers, there's other factors to also take in to determine your fertility, but that's for a whole nother episode. What happened was that when I got pregnant, I didn't ovulate on the day that I was supposed to ovulate. In fact, I thought I ovulated because my temperature spiked on day 15, but it wasn't until 6 days after I actually thought I ovulated when I really did. And so with that understanding, knowing that I actually ovulated later than I did and had this discussion with the midwife, she agreed with me that the estimated due date initially given to me by the OB was not accurate, that it needed to be pushed back based on the date of conception. Because technically, a baby isn't conceived until an egg is released. So if ovulation was not on day 15 and it happened to be 6 days later, that was when conception happened. And I noticed the trends because once my temperature spiked 6 days later, it continued to stay elevated. And when I was supposed to start my period, which I didn't, I even factored in 6 extra days because of the ovulation date. Intuitively, I knew I was pregnant. So when I did the pregnancy test, it came back positive. And my temperature continued to stay elevated because progesterone is a warming hormone. That is when I knew that I was pregnant and had conceived. I share this with you because, again, I wonder how many women from my personal experience and from the clients that I've worked with who have gotten pregnant, who are given an estimated due date and were forced to be induced or forced into a C-section because they weren't able to go into labor and delivery at 40 weeks and then develop complications. A lot of women can experience some traumatic events, a lot of fear, a lot of mental and emotional stuff can come up during that time and they never really get to fully process and release. My goal is to educate and inspire and share my perspectives, to be an advocate for yourself, start tracking your cycle, be aware of your body so you know when you ovulate, when conception happens, and to be able to determine the due date from there and work with a midwife, for example, who is more open to recognizing that maybe the due date given is not the most accurate and it releases the pressure. Because another thing that happens in women is that when it comes time to the due date and baby's not here yet, they also put a lot of pressure on themselves to go into labor and delivery. And so they do all these crazy things to jumpstart labor and delivery, like curb walking, drinking raspberry leaf, taking supplements to induce labor, which are not necessarily bad things. These help support a quicker, easier labor and delivery, but our focus shouldn't be on trying to force it to happen. And that's the key. When we're so fixated on a specific date that the baby should be here, we're focused on trying to control the outcome. And if it doesn't happen, then that sends our body into a stress response, which then also impacts labor and delivery and can also increase the risk of complications as well. Even if you determine an estimated due date based off your conception day, depending on when you ovulate, don't get fixated on that. Release and surrender the outcome, because babies can also come at 41 weeks. Sometimes they can come at even 42 weeks. And with that understanding, take the pressure off yourself. Don't get fixated on a date. And also be prepared for people to ask, when's the due date, right? And so how I navigated this during my own pregnancy is that I would say it could be between this date and this date. I literally said between 40 to 42 weeks. I would give the dates, whatever those were. So with this discussion with my midwife, knowing that the due date's actually later than what was originally stated, I continue to give the range of dates because it takes the pressure off not forcing labor and delivery to happen and fully trusting my body and the baby and God, because God created us for this. God created the innate intelligence, not only within our body, but within the baby, to know when it's time to come into this world. So allowing yourself to fully surrender the outcome of when it's going to happen, and not only when it's going to happen, but how it's going to happen, is going to put you into a state of relaxation, calm, and peace, which therefore is going to reduce complications and result in an incredible birth experience. Now, I haven't been there yet because, as I mentioned, I'm 39 weeks going into 40 in a couple of days. And so I'm just surrendering the outcome of when the baby's here, completely detaching from the estimated due date, and just focusing on trusting my body, surrendering, trusting God, knowing that my body is capable of doing what God has designed it to do. Once I go through labor and delivery of baby Vasquez, I will definitely share my birth story and experience when that time comes. But until then, I wanted to share this perspective, this insight, that the due date given by the OB may not always be accurate, even if it's based off your ovulation, aka conception day. Don't get attached to it. Don't get attached to it, because if you get so focused, so attached to baby being here by a certain day, it's going to put you into a state of control, which is rooted in fear and can create more pain, more inflammation in your body, which can increase the risk of more complications once you finally go into labor and delivery. Or it actually can stall labor and delivery from happening, which can then result in getting induced, result in getting a C-section. And I'm not saying this is the case with every single person, but from what I'm learning, from what I'm understanding, is that when we try to force things, when we try to control things in our life, things are going to go the way that we don't want or we don't expect. And the more we can surrender and allow what's meant to be, what's meant to happen, fully trusting our body, trusting the baby, trusting God, the better the outcome, the better the experience. So if you're currently pregnant or you know someone who is, please share this episode with them, because my goal is to inspire you, but also educate you and empower you to have an incredible pregnancy and birth experience. If there was something that you took away from this episode, I'd love to hear from you. Please share with me the Kate Vasquez on Instagram. And continue to tune in as I share my experiences, my insights, not only with this pregnancy, but in life, things that God is calling me to share so we can continue to be radiant and resilient.